Finding a friend is a very hard thing to do, especially if you expect them to last you for a long time or even a lifetime. Finding a best friend is even a more harder and rare thing to do. But finding a best friend that betrays you and turns out not what you expected is actually a pretty easy thing to find. I mean, I can attest to these stories that I've read here. Dudes, we're already on part 3 of these. So without further ado, let's grab a blanket, turn off your lights for true scary horror stories from your so-called best friends. My friend's best friend. This all started about a year ago, and is still continuing with the creepiness. Rachel, my friend, had just moved back to Missouri from Texas, and only found one person in the incredibly small town I lived in that cycled. She found that he was a nice guy, a bit particular about who he hangs out with, but a decent guy enough. He lived a little ways away from town, but Rachel wanted him and me to get along, since we were the only ones she knew in this town and she could really stand with. The first time we met, I was still dealing with discovering of being bisexual. Being gay or straight was fine in my house, but you had to pick a side. So I was yapping about this to her until he came in. Unfortunately, he heard what I was talking about and well, we decided to talk about our sex lives. I have talked about stranger things with strangers, so I didn't think anything about it. I don't care for him and his domineering personality, but I don't try to pick a fight with him. I assume I won't meet him again. A week later, Rachel gives him my number without permission. I yell, but I don't think anything of it. He doesn't seem the type to abuse it. He does. He texts me asking if I want to drink with him. I find out he's a bit of an alcoholic. Lovely. I also found out all his porn habits. He asks what type of toys I use on myself. I tell him I have to go to bed. This is our second conversation. Rachel finds it more funny than creepy. I try to avoid his text by saying I am tired from class and work. I avoid him for a month. I know Rachel is trying to make friends and that if he got angry with me, he'd take it out on her, so I do my best not to rock the boat. He moves right down the road from me. He starts texting me, wanting me to come over and drink with him. I purposely antagonize him until he stops texting. He changes his number, and all is well in the world until 6 months later. He starts driving by my house, which is on a main road, so I can't complain. He now stops by my house and talks to my mother and me when we are outside the house. I know he wants to hook up and find it disgusting. He starts texting again. When my windows are open, he lets me know what I'm doing. When I walk around town, he lets me know what I am wearing. He comments on how cute I look and how I am totally his type. I start wearing baggier pants and huge shirts, so he finds me unattractive and leaves me alone. Another month passes. He sends me his theories on what I like in bed. He tells me how he would love to tie me up and make me scream his name. I finally block his number. He still comes by the house. I still hear from Rachel how he wants to hang out. I haven't told her any of this. I thought he was my friend. Not sure if this fits in the criteria of this subreddit, but I thought this was incredibly creepy. Junior year of high school, my parents got a job offer out of state, and so I was forced to move all across the country. I started a new school late into the academic year, mid-March, and had a hard time fitting into the new school. All I wanted was to make a friend, but was too shy to talk to anyone. It was around this time that my friends left MySpace to join Facebook, so I did the same to keep close to them. Some days later, I received a friend request from David. David was a guy that I had been friends with in my old town. Well, he wasn't exactly my friend, but rather the friend of another friend. My friend Jerry had introduced him to the group and would bring him along every time all of us hung out. We knew that David was a year older than us and that he had gone to a different school, but other than that, we didn't really know anything about him. In fact, We kind of always just referred to him as Jerry's friend because he never even bothered to talk to any of us. So when I received a friend request from him on Facebook, I was more than confused. He had hardly spoken to me when I had lived near him, so for him to want to be friends with me after all of this time just seemed a little strange. But I was so lonely and desperate for friends that I didn't care. Other than that, nothing really seemed off about him, at least not at the time. Looking back, I do remember that he hardly had any pictures and friends when I first accepted his request, but like I said, this was around the time that people had just started using Facebook, so it didn't seem all that weird for him to have such a barren profile. And over the years, his friend list got a lot bigger, even more so than mine, so I didn't really think anything of it. But anyways, I digress. I accepted his friend request, and it was just like this that David and I became friends. He told me he had just started university and that he was lonely because he was too shy to make friends. I told him that I was having a hard time in my new school for the same reasons, and we bonded over that. Little by little, we started talking more. He shared his problems with me, and I shared mine with him. And when it was time for me to apply to university, he even helped me out. He taught me how to sign up for my SATs, ACTs, helped me apply to scholarships, and even paid for one of my application fees. Then, when I finally started university, he helped me with that as well. He told me where to buy books, gave me studying tips, provided emotional support, so when he asked for my phone number, I didn't even hesitate to give it to him. David was my best friend, and I wanted to keep him close even if we were physically away from each other. It was around this time that David started sharing more of his life with me. And all of it was pretty normal stuff. He had a job at Pizza Hut, which he hated, but needed to keep in order to pay for bills. He also played soccer, but not for his university or anything. It was just a group of guys that got together on the weekends to unwind. I think the biggest thing he told me was that he had flunked out of university, and that I was the only person that knew because he was too embarrassed to tell anyone else. And at one point, he also had to move back in with his mom, which he hated a lot. 2, maybe 3 years into our friendship, my family decides to take a trip back to the city where we had lived prior to moving all across the country, and I sadly told him and all of my old high school friends. Most of them were pretty excited about the idea of us all hanging out together again, because after high school, we had just all gone our different ways. When I contacted David about it, he showed little interest in hanging out with us. I thought it was weird, you know? I wasn't some stranger he had met online, but rather someone who had been in his life for many years. I kept insisting and asking for a reason, and then he finally gave me one. He told me that his pictures had been heavily edited, and that he was afraid of disappointing me if we met in real life. I told him that it didn't matter what he looked like, and that I just wanted to meet him, but he still didn't want to hang out. Instead, he just started being a huge dick to me. He knew exactly what buttons to push, knew all of my insecurities and secrets, and had started using all of that knowledge to hurt me. So I just stopped talking to him. Some weeks later, I meet my friends as planned, and much to my surprise, I see David there, looking just like he did on the pictures. I didn't understand why he had lied about photoshopping his pictures, or why he had said he didn't want to meet me only for him to show at our friend's house. I was so angry at him that I didn't ask any questions. I just kept waiting for an apology. But David wouldn't approach me. He was treating me like he treated me back when we were in high school. I was really upset, but given that he had been such a huge dick to me, I figured this was just another attempt at getting under my skin. We were all drinking and talking about what we were up to, and then it was his time to share. He pretty much just said the same things I already knew about him. He said that he wished that he was still in university like the rest of us, but that he had flunked out and that he was just living with his mom, said that he was miserable there and that he wanted to move out, but that his job at Pizza Hut wasn't paying enough for him to move out on his own. At this point, I was already pretty pissed off, and the alcohol had given me enough courage to finally ask him why he had been ignoring me. He apologized, but admitted that he hardly remembered me, which hurt my feelings but also pissed me off even more. I told him about Facebook and about our text messages, and he just kept insisting that he didn't use Facebook. Apparently, he had used MySpace at one point, but had stopped using that when he switched over to Tumblr. A Facebook account was something that he hadn't even considered making. I asked him about the text messages, and he just said that I had probably confused him with another David, because he had never had my number. I thought that denying it was a lousy excuse, but Jerry backed him up, which pissed me off even more. The thing, though, was that David hadn't just been talking to me on Facebook, but also to a bunch of us. So when we kept calling him out on his shit, he just told us to text this David guy to prove that it wasn't him. He set his phone on the table and I texted him, but no new messages appeared on his phone. Then, while we were all arguing about how we need to give it some time, the David that I had been talking to for years responds, proving that we had been talking to a fake all along. Things turned out pretty awkward at this point, with all of us feeling angry and betrayed and David obviously feeling extremely violated. So with all of us wanting answers, we open up our friend's laptop and search for David's profile on Facebook. The first thing that David points out is that whoever this was, they were using his mother's maiden name and not his real last name, and that most of the people on his friend list were people that he knew in real life. None of them were people that he kept in contact with. His display picture was also of a dog, which he owned years ago, but that had since died, just like the fake David had told me. All measures that, looking back, I'm guessing were used by this person to keep David's close friends from actually finding him on Facebook. The older pictures on Facebook had been taken from his MySpace back when he still had been using that, but most of the newer ones had been taken away from his Tumblr, which he apparently uploaded pretty often. The weirdest thing, though, was that there were some pictures he swore he had never seen before. These were all pictures of his soccer games taken from the audience, which the fake David had said his brother had taken. The real David said his brother never went to his games, neither did any of his family members or friends. Further exploring his own fake profile, David pointed out that, while a bunch of status updates were of things that had never happened, a lot of them were accurate. Whoever this person was, they had been watching David for a long time. They knew his schedule, knew what movies he went to, knew what ice cream flavors he liked, knew his favorite bands, knew practically everything about him. We did confront the fake David, but he never answered the text messages and instead deleted the profile before we had a chance to examine it any further. So we never did get any answers. I don't know why that person pretended to be David for so long or why they even did it in the first place. All I know is that I felt extremely violated for having shared so many private details of my life with him. And of course, I also felt a great deal of pity for the real David. I wondered for the longest time how this person found him and how they managed to learn so many private details of his life. Then a few months back, my mother calls me, saying she found a profile with her name, but my pictures on it. She thought that I'd made a second profile, and I didn't tell her the truth because I didn't want to scare her, but truth was, I didn't even know that profile existed. I've always kept Facebook set to private, and I no longer accept random friend requests, nor do I post my pictures anywhere else. So, this profile only had real old photos of me, and nothing weird like David's soccer game pictures, but it was still active, and had been active for a while. None of the friends were people that I know, and none of the updates were of things that I've been doing in real life. So, I don't know if the profile belonged to the same person that stalked David, but I'm extremely average looking, so I don't know why anyone would want to use my pictures when there are way prettier girls online. So I'm guessing it had to be him. I don't know. I just reported the profile and it no longer exists. But I wonder if this person is still pretending to be me. Or if they've moved on to somebody else. Former internet friend becomes unstable stalker. Now, I'm not entirely sure how to start this, as it's kind of a long story, so be prepared. I am a male. At the time of this story begins, I was 14. I've had a bit of a shitty life. I wasn't ever without food in my belly, or a roof over my head, or anything. But I lived in some sketchy places, and there was a lot of abuse in my household. I was shy, lacking in confidence. As a little kid, I was always kind of chubby, and though I got tall and thinned out a bit in middle school, I feel like I never got over the damage being a little chunky as a young age did to my self-esteem. Kids are mean as hell, sometimes without meaning to be. Freshman year of high school, and I found myself a bit of an outcast. I was dealing with clinical depression, though I didn't know it at the time, and my shyness and lack of self-esteem was a huge hindrance to my ability to make friends. I was always aware of how painfully awkward I was, and there were times where in my depression, I said something or did something that came across a little weird or creepy, or in desperation. Never anything like some of the truly bizarre, scary things you might find on this very sub, but I found myself trying so desperately to fit in or be a part of a group that I sometimes inserted myself into conversations where I was unwelcome without meaning to intrude. I was aware of this, and I really didn't want to be seen as that kid, so I just stopped trying altogether. I found myself on the internet, and after drifting from fandom to fandom, I managed to end up on a fairly large foreign music forum. Such acts are presented as perfect people living in a perfect world, so they were a nice escape for me. Jerome and I hung out mostly on the same thread, devoted to a specific pop idol group. He PM'd me one day, saying something about how he had noticed that we had similar opinions and had the same favorites in the group, among other things. At one point, there was a bit of drama between mods and issues with trolls, and the forum made its set of rules more strict. Those who didn't like the new rules ended up migrating to different communication platforms. Jerome and I were part of the same group of 5 or so internet friends. We ended up following each other on Twitter and using that as our primary form of communication, occasionally using chat rooms. Now for some information on Jerome. He was initially kind of vague about his age, but when the others in the group really pressed him to answer, he told us he was 17. I sometimes doubt this, but that's something to discuss later. He told us he was a white kid that lives in New York City, that his parents were filthy rich, and that he was actually fairly popular. We never really believed him when he said that he was rich, and especially not when he said he was popular, because if he was, why would he be on the internet for hours and hours every day? But we decided not to really say anything about it, because it was the internet. Now, a year or so passed, and of course, the group got closer. These people were my friends truly. Say what you want about friendship over the internet, these people knew things about me that I never told anybody before, and vice versa. We Skyped fairly often. I met one of them in person. We actually ended up at the same college years later of a pure luck. We didn't even know we lived so close to each other for quite a while. As we start to step out from behind our avatars and reveal who we really were to each other, I start to notice this rift forming between the group and Jerome. He didn't seem willing to step out from behind his screen, and I didn't want to pressure him or be an asshole about it. The internet can be a dangerous place, most definitely, but the others didn't understand, and he ended up being booted from the group, so to speak. He just stopped coming around, and there was just like this feeling like he wasn't welcome. Him and I still tweeted each other every once in a blue moon, but I spent most of my internet time chatting with the group. Eventually, he just stopped tweeting. One day, Jerome's friend requested me on Facebook. At this point, it was kind of an unspoken taboo to try and communicate with each other on real life or real life platforms like that. We like to keep our friendship away from where the people in our actual lives might notice, which was understandable, because we said some pretty outrageous things to each other at times. We had our own weird humor that we didn't want our parents, friends, families to see, and we knew a lot about each other that we can never consider telling anybody in real life. Struggles with sexuality, family relations, abuse. I didn't add Jerome on Facebook. I just didn't feel comfortable with that. I might have actually done it had it been one of the other three, but he hadn't been around much for a good month or so, and I felt like he had left the group just before everybody had really entirely removed their internet mask. He knew my non-professional email though, and I got an email from him one day that was really just a bunch of babbling about how much he missed me, about how I was his best friend. There was also some kind of angry stuff about how I had abandoned him, but for some reason it didn't raise any red flags. I felt terrible. Jerome had told us about his anxiety issues, his depression. He hallucinated sometimes. He thought he might be gay, and his parents were very vocal bigots. He had told us all of this, and we had basically tossed him aside when he didn't want to show us his face. I felt like I had failed my friend, I guess. We ended up exchanging emails, sometimes treating it more like an instant messenger. I kept this secret from the others, because they didn't seem to approve of him anymore. We were all weirdos in a sense, but I guess they saw what I didn't, that he was quite a few levels higher on the weirdo scale. After several months of this, Jerome one day sent me an email that said nothing but, "I love you." I really did not know how to respond. In fact, it took me hours, and all I could think to say was, "What?" He responded back with a practical novel about how he was deeply in love with me, how he'd always been. He told me that he daydreamed about me, that he fantasized about marrying me, about making love to me, just to get through the day. At this point, I was in shock. I mean, I had known he had a few bolts loose all along. Hell, so did I. But I honestly couldn't believe that this was happening. I asked him if he was joking, and when I suggested that, he got really angry, and I realized that he was being serious. I chose not to respond to his email, and told the group about it as soon as I could. They were confused as to why I still talked to him and did the whole "I told you so" thing. A day or two passed, and he sent me another email, this one saying nothing but "I love you so much." I ignored it, and an hour or so later, he sent me another, this time talking about suicide. I couldn't let that happen, so I responded. I begged him not to, but I also told him that I didn't share his feelings. I told him that he was my friend, and that I valued him. He told me that that wasn't good enough, and proceeded to list my school, its address, its phone number, my home address, the town I lived in, names of in-real-life friends and family, just crazy shit. I had no idea how he knew all this. I still can't figure it out. Facebook, possibly? Although I'd certainly never listed my address there. I soon got a text from one of the others. She was freaking out because he had friend requested a bunch of her friends, and when one of them accepted, he had messaged them and told them some of her secrets. I honestly can't remember exactly how it happened, but she blocked him and managed to get his Facebook deleted. I deactivated my Facebook in a panic, and we all made new Twitters. A couple months passed, and we all started to feel a little more comfortable again. Then, I remember that email account existed. School had started, and I hadn't been using it anywhere, as the address itself was really embarrassing. When I logged in, I saw that he had emailed me as recently as 5 or 6 days before. I was horrified to see that he was that fixated on me, and without even opening one of those emails, I deleted the account. I know it's not as scary as some of the other stories on here, as there never was any physical encounter, but Jerome almost managed to get out a member of our group. I am still unduly paranoid of giving out information, even to people in real life. My anxiety is far worse, and to this day, every once in a while, I think, what if he shows up at my family home and hurts them or something? That being said, I also made 3 great friends on the internet, who I'm still in touch with. The internet is such a great tool of communication and connection, but this experience made me realize that internet is real life. Jerome could have ruined some of my relationships, ruined my life, had he managed to tell my family some of the things he knew. He might know so much more about me than I even know. We tend to think of our internet existence as being entirely separate from our ones away from the screen, but they really aren't.